I want to first introduce myself. My name is Kathy Hartgraves. I live in Bellingham, Washington, which is all the way to almost to the Canadian border. I serve as one of the best congregations in the world named Garden Street United Methodist Church. I'm in my third year there. I also serve on the Interagency Sexual Ethics Task Force. Say that really fast several times, and then you'll get a prize if you're able to do that. For a while, I was ordained. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself while we're waiting on this. I was ordained in the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference as an elder in full connection in 2008. That's when the remember when the market everything just crashed. My husband's career went boom. And we ended up, he wanted to put out a national search. We ended up in South Dakota for about 8 years. And luckily, when I got there, they embraced me with open arms, and I had great opportunities for leadership in the Dakotas Annual Conference. That is where I have a lot of experience with the response teams and working on different sexual ethics things. And then came back in 2016. The market was coming back, and we were really homesick, so I called the bishop back in the Pacific Northwest and asked to come back, and they said yes. So now we've been back, like I said, we're in our third year, so been around a little bit. So that's who I am. Also, we have four different areas that we are doing these breakout places with. One is boundaries, and the next one is us here today, which is response team. And then the next is supporting the alleged victim or the accused. And then administrative judicial response. And so I don't know exactly how you have this all set up. My understanding would be that probably the people in this room may be in this room for the whole time. Is that correct? So I will be your first person, and then Becky Williams will be your next one, and she is absolutely outstanding. You will really enjoy her knowledge, so I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. So in this particular section, we will have three different areas we're going to talk about. The first one is partnership. You'll see that in the back of your little yellow sheet here. First one is partnership. The second one is recruitment. And the third subject area is invitation to serve. And so let's begin with partnership. This is since we're supposed to have an hour and a half, but it looks like we're going to have just a little bit over an hour at this point. We have, in my mind, I'm thinking we have a lot of time, but I may be wrong. We'll find out. But I really encourage you, if you have things you feel like would be great for the body to hear, that we have a talk back and forth. I just don't want to stand here and talk at you, because you've been sitting a lot, and I want to be aware of that and sensitive to that. I want to make sure if you need to get up and jump around a little bit, I certainly understand. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm not one that can sit for a long time. I guess I probably should just personalize that a little bit. But in the partnership area, this is something you've already heard probably over and over again today, but I cannot stress this enough. Nothing happens with the response team without the bishop and the cabinet being in partnership with you. There's no such thing as a rogue response team or a response team that goes out on their own. You are deployed by the bishop's office and the district superintendent. So regardless of how people might be feeling, I've worked with a lot of response teams back in the Dakotas, and one of the things that we would find is that sometimes people on the response teams would get a little frustrated because they thought the process wasn't going the way they thought it should. And we would say, that's not your job. Your job is to walk with them and be fully present to the congregation or the victim or the person who has been alleged. Your job is not to worry about the judicial administrative part. That is the bishop and the cabinet. So that is something we just want to make sure you're very, very clear on, that the bishop and the district superintendent is who you answer to. And there may even be a time in this whole thing where you are asked to just step out. And it's going to drive you crazy, maybe, if you're a curious person, because you won't know how it all turned out for a while. But your job is not to be administrative. And that's the administrative judicial part here. But it's just make sure you're really aware of that. It is a partnership with them. And then the next thing, according to that, because of that, the bishop really needs to feel really good about who he or she has got on a response team. If they're going to deploy a person or a team of people or whatever the case might be, you can imagine they need to feel really good about those people. So because of that, I believe in my mind, recruitment is so paramount. If you got to have the right people involved. So recruiting the appropriate people is something that a lot of times you will hear district superintendents and bishops talk about a lot. They want to make sure they can, whoever they've deployed, they can trust that they're not going to go off on their own and be rogue. They're going to stay in the system and stay within the boundaries of what they've been asked to do, so that everything can be really good, and the best scenario for everybody. So as I'm talking, if you have a question, please, or something, or an insight, something you want to throw in, because I feel like I'm preaching at this point, and I don't feel like I want to preach today. So just be aware of that. So we have. Go ahead.
Yeah, just on partnership, it does sound more like. This is way too loaded. I don't mean in a negative sense, but it sounds more hierarchical than partnership. You're saying partnership there. You follow them.
I'm just going to state something that's very obvious,
yeah.
And if you don't know this, I don't know where you've been, but we are a hierarchical system. We have a bishop, we have a cabinet, and then there's, all that. So there is an inherent reality to that, but what we're trying to say is you are in partner. They would, the language is partnership, yes.
But you're answering.
You're responding. That's exactly right. You're responding. I really appreciate what you're saying, but there is a reality to it that anyway. And there's also the administrative, whatever, the legalistic part of it and all of that. That's not our job, and the response teams, all of that. So, but I really appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense to me. So our goal is always to have healing and recovery and restorative justice. That is always the goal, and so we got to keep that in mind as well. And that we are a really important part of that to make that happen. So as I say all of this, as you can imagine, not everyone is cut out to serve on a response team. And so careful and selective recruitment is really vital at this point. Remember that, again, that the response teams are not called to any judicial or disciplinary processes or for legal resolution of a solution. And even if the people you are walking along with ask you those questions, you likely aren't going to have the answers, because you're going to need to go back and say to your district superintendent, what is the answer to that? This isn't something I can, and that's just not our role. That's just not something that we. And again, we are deployed by the bishop and the DS in consultation with the bishop to provide care to a congregation or an individual. So here are some trauma situations, just some examples of situations that I have seen where response teams have been deployed. One of the first ones that we always talk about first, it seems like, is clergy sexual misconduct. That's usually the first thing that comes out of our mind. The next one maybe would be a lay person's sexual misconduct directly involving the congregation. Another might be a sudden death of a pastor or a prominent lay person in the congregation. That's another likely one. This is another one that I worked with at one point, where there was embezzlement or misuse of funds. There is a lot of hurt that happens over that situation. And even accusations of discrimination with ethnicity or gender or age or nationality. As you can imagine, that would be very hurtful. For whatever reason, sometimes there is a sudden sabbatical of a pastor, and it just throws a congregation into a tailspin. They just don't even know what to do with it or how to process it. And sometimes a response team will be involved in that. Another one is, unfortunately, is church closures. As you can imagine the pain around that, particularly when the congregation that the church is closing around is having a hard time letting go of it. It's a very hurtful time, and that's another one. And a sexual abuse of a church member at a church-affiliated event, let's say it's within, that has also been something that has been extended a lot of care to. And then just any other instance that is requested by the bishop or the bishop's representative. And if you can think of those, you can shout them out, but there's so many more. There's so many more. I just gave you a few of the things that I am aware of. But do you have any other ideas? Because I think there's some response team members in this room. It'd be helpful to know. Would you mind raising your hand if you have served? See, a lot of you. A whole lot of you. So what are some other situations that you have served?
Pastors being arrested for drug possession.
Pastors being arrested for drug possession. It's a big one. Any other ones?
Pornography.
I'm sorry, what?
Pornography.
Pornography, absolutely.
Drug and
Registered sex
alcohol
offender in
addiction.
the congregation.
A registered sex offender in the congregation. And how to navigate that. Anybody else?
Somebody said drug and alcohol.
Drug and alcohol addiction issues? Absolutely.
And then the fires and floods.
I didn't hear that one.
Fires and floods.
Fires and floods, natural disasters, absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
Layperson sexual misconduct against a female pastor.
Right, layperson sexual misconduct against a female pastor.
A pastor dies by suicide.
Pastor dies by suicide.
We
This
had
is-
one, a heart attack of a pastor in the pulpit. A fatal
Wow.
heart attack.
A heart attack of a pastor in the pulpit. Wow. These are heavy, aren't they?
I was thinking about, this is what the panel was talking to. In Alaska, and I relate to, I'm on the board of the Alaskan Child and Family, which was an old Jesse Lee home, and the historic trauma that comes from working with populations who look
Wow,
at.
absolutely.
So I would assume that churches that didn't deal authentically with any of these may have significant historical trauma and still need intervention or response.
So historical trauma,
Yeah.
and oh my goodness, the layers to
The
that.
secrets, the layers of secrets that.
Absolutely, the layers of secrets that could be generations old.
Yeah.
That's good. Somebody else had their hand up.
A murder of a congregation member.
Murder of a congregation member, absolutely.
Pastor refused to leave a charge.
Pastor refuses to leave a charge in the United Methodist system? Wow.
Yes.
Wow, wow. There is situations for sure where I've seen pastors won't leave town, and they're still in the community after they have been relieved because of misconduct, and I've seen that many times. So it's it's not an easy thing, not for the person coming in. That's a very hard situation. Any other situations you can think of?
Violent death of a pastor.
Okay. Did you say the spouse's death?
I said violent.
Violent death.
Yes, of a pastor.
The pastor, thank you.
Staff firings that didn't go well.
Staff firings that didn't go well, and there's a lot of heat going on in the congregation. Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things I wanted to say before we move on to some more things is, and this may not be a big surprise to you, but it was to me when I started doing this work, how, and I thought that I was doing pretty good, but how even someone who feels that they are doing a pretty good job with their boundaries and doing really intentional work with it, it is so easy to stray. It is so easy, when we've talked about that many times today, where your needs aren't getting met and you don't even realize it's happening, and then all of a sudden you realize you've got this relationship going on, whether it's intimate or whatever the case might be, but it's not. So what I'm saying is it can happen to any of us, and I think somebody said that this morning in a different way. But it's not, it's so easy for us to walk in and go, oh my goodness, I'll be on the response team because I got to put a stop to this stuff. This is ridiculous, kind of. We can have that kind of thinking, but really that's not the truth. It can happen to any of us. And so it's part of our job to have that compassionate spirit and to come in and try to be on both sides of the fence a little bit, but we walk with the victim most of the time. And all of that. And then again, I'm going to say it again because I've been asked to, all of everything we just said, all of the situations we named, is always done in partnership with the bishop and the district superintendent. It's not something we do on our own. It's something that we are deployed, and we take our instruction from them. So I want to think about this now. What are some of the characteristics that when you think about someone that would walk into a situation, whether it's a congregation or a one-on-one situation, walk into any of those situations that you heard named out loud, what are some of the characteristics in your mind that you think would be helpful for the
In terms
person?
of how people respond to the congregation?
I'm sorry.
Talking about how.
I'm asking about as we are recruiting, we're in the recruitment section. As we are recruiting, I'm sorry, I haven't been very clear. If we were recruiting, what would be some of the qualities that you could see in that person? Non-anxious presence. Excellent.
Good listener.
Good listener.
Someone who's able to discern.
Compassionate, empathic spirit. Beautiful.
Clear boundaries.
Clear boundaries.
Able to follow direction.
Able to follow direction.
Non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental.
Highly differentiated.
Highly differentiated. Let's unpack that a little bit, would you?
Person who doesn't get entangled in relationships recognizes who they are apart from their relationship with other people.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you.
Can tolerate sitting with the pain of the world.
Can tolerate sitting with the pain of the world. It's beautiful.
Doesn't take things personally when they have people angry at them.
Doesn't take things personally because people could be angry at them. And they're just the receiver of it, but not the reason or the cause. What were you gonna say?
Someone who has time.
Someone who has time, who can drop everything. Oftentimes it's 24 hours seems to be the magic that they like somebody responding to. That's great. You need to have time to be able to do that. Yes.
Someone who knows when they need their own self-care.
Somebody who knows when they need their own self-care. When they can start to identify, I'm starting to get too connected to this situation. You need to tell your DS or whoever you're answering to, usually it's the bishop or the DS, this isn't working for me. I need to relieve myself. Yes.
Someone who can work in collaboration with the team. Some people are just individual and go out.
Mhm. Right, got to be able to work in collaboration with the team, no Lone Rangers. Yeah.
I would think about confidentiality.
Confidentiality. Okay, yes.
People are specifically licensed in group therapy.
People specifically, yep. That's great. Maybe some legal expertise might be good. It's all kinds of things. What are you going to say?
Cultural competency.
Cultural competency. Unpack that just a little bit.
Someone who has knowledge or awareness of different cultures, different races, ethnicities, different settings.
Wonderful. Yeah, maybe bilingual might go with that as well. Somebody else?
Train Stephen ministers are wonderful people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Trained Stephen ministers. Yes.
We have found the need at times to have a differentiator for youth, for when there has been a breach by a youth pastor, or that the youth are very strong and they don't know how to bridge the gap of a leader that they admire falling.
Absolutely. That is a really good one. It's great. Yes.
Remain strength-based.
Strength-based. Okay. That's great. Let me see what I had on my list. I think you got most of them. We have availability, the need to have flexibility to respond within a 24-hour period, to represent diversity of gender, race, ethnicity, age, geographic location. Some of our areas are pretty sparsely populated, and something could happen out there, and as well as in an urban. And then somebody alluded to this, the professional expertise like counseling and social work or legal experience, those kind of things could be helpful. Situations where a bilingual person would be helpful, that's important. And then also I loved, somebody else already said this, but a non-anxious presence, particularly in a really strained situation. The ability to listen and have empathy, to display emotional health and maturity. Not someone who gets off on knowing all of the curious details of things. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah. We did a really, I thought, a fantastic job of putting together a team when I was in the Dakotas conference. And we were rocking. We were doing really well. One team member something triggered that person, and it went bad. And it was really hard to pull that person out because that person wouldn't let go. Was so invested in the damage that did to the congregation, to everyone involved, to the conference relationship with this clergy. It was a clergy person. It was just awful. It was he never recovered, and he ended up leaving the conference, going to a different one because he just could not. His anger. So you've ever heard of the word righteous anger? It's a great word, righteous anger, but that righteous anger takes you to a place where you can't function with all these other ways that we need in order to be effective. It's a tricky, I think righteous anger is great, but it isn't always appropriate. And when you're walking with someone and trying to be a healer, righteous anger isn't always the way. But there is a time and place for it, yes.
May I add
Sure.
to your committee of recruitment lay leadership? Over the 20 years I've been doing this, some of the congregation said, thank you for bringing lay leadership, because I feel because they were mad at the conference, which meant they were mad at all pastors or anybody connected to the church. And for people outside the church, maybe they would open up a little differently.
So lay people coming in and doing this work was easier entry because of the relation. That is such a good point. Thank you, that's great. That's why we would really lean on district superintendents to identify with their pastors in their districts who those lay people might be in their congregations. But that's really good. Jessica?
Differentiation within the team, in other words, gender differentiation, race differentiation, just a lot of differentiation.
Right.
Because sometimes we've heard, at one point I've been at this 21 years.
Wonderful.
We had, due to some people getting off the team, it seemed like we had almost all women. And when we would teach seminars, they were saying, where's the men?
Right.
So we knew we had to get somebody. It's just twisting arms.
Yeah. Twisting arms isn't
Well,
one
it's
of my
not
favorite ways of
twisting
getting people.
arms, yeah, I don't mean
Yeah,
that.
I know what you
but
mean. Yeah. But that was an intentional recruit, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't want to step on toes, but the word recruitment is a word used by the Army, our military, and I believe in the church that we invite people into ministry with us. So to invite people rather than to recruit people, it's a language differentiation, but I think it is an important thing to note that how we use language is really important. And so I don't like to recruit people. I like to invite people to be on our response team.
So a better way of saying it might be invite people with these particular skills and gifts and abilities.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's great. Thank you for that clarification. I think that's important. Yes.
I clarify that invite people is something different than asking for volunteers.
Yes, it is. And I'm not asking for volunteers. I would not ask for a volunteer, but carefully invite people thoughtfully. And it is important to ask your superintendents, beg your superintendents to give you names of people that they believe have these gifts and graces.
Right.
However, they're very busy. That's one thing that we found, how busy they are, and that this doesn't come on their top 10 list of major priorities. And so sometimes it's helpful for you to do your own investigation, do your own networking, and make suggestions to the superintendent. Would these be possible folk? Do you see these gifts and graces in these folk that we might consider inviting them? And that's really good because they know things you don't know. And so it also gives them a leg up, and it helps them gently reminds them that this is an important thing to pay attention to. And then when they're at the different charge conferences and so forth, then they can have their little antenna up.
That's great. Anybody else have any kind of clarification input about the words invite and recruitment, because that's intriguing to me, that would be a trigger to somebody, the recruitment name. So, yeah, I would love to hear more from other people about that.
Well, I found it interesting too, so I went
Okay.
to look it up.
Yeah, yeah.
Recruit means to get someone to join something. You might recruit people for the Navy, or you might recruit members for your quilting group. It refers often to formally joining an organization or a group.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do you have something like that?
We'll add to the variety of terms because we nominate people.
Right,
You do?
we do.
And when someone's nominated, in my current situation, I get all the names of all the nominees. I circulate those names to the bishop and the cabinet.
Right.
They tell me only if they say, not that person, they don't give any explanation, they just say not that person. That maintains the trust level that's essential for the bishop and the
You don't
cabinet.
ask questions, you know they know more than you do. Just, yeah, that's right. Are you going to say something, Kimberly? No, okay. Okay. Let's look at the rest of here. So another one is to demonstrate integrity and ability to maintain confidentiality. And to remember the purpose is not about curiosity. We mentioned that a minute ago. And this is another piece of this. People who have experienced healing themselves can often be very helpful. But let's unpack that just a little bit. People who have experienced healing themselves can be quite helpful. The person I was talking about just a few moments ago in that example, we thought had received healing and had really worked through everything, and buttons got pushed, things went really awry. But it's really important. We think it's super helpful to have people who have this experience. There are a lot of survivors who are drawn to this work. It's just a natural thing because you want to do something. You want to, after your healing process, you want to put it into action and help others. That is such a natural thing. It's in every area of life we're like that. But the healing word is really the operative word. Do you guys have any input about that? Any thoughts about that yourself? Yes.
Well, I'm a pastoral counselor, and all people are wounded.
Right.
And what happened to your colleague is that person got triggered at a place of their own woundedness. And so if you know people are psychologically mature, meaning they've looked at themselves, it doesn't always have to be therapy, but that go to a spiritual director or, have done self-work, I think is really important.
Thank you. That's very good. Yes.
I think self-awareness is important. You need to know where your stuff is. And when you're getting triggered or you've got some stuff, you're going to know it. So if you've got some self-awareness, that's when you need to step back.
And the self-awareness, you've got to have the ability to step back then.
Exactly.
That's a part of the emotional maturity we talked about and our emotional health. Yes.
A couple of those all fall under like Bowen Family Systems theory and its
Right.
implication in the church.
Right. Thank you. That's great. Do you have something?
Just that you need to have a deep enough team that if a team member gets triggered or has to step back, someone else can run with it while they do their self-care.
Right.
And we can call them out, you know what I mean?
Right. Yes.
I'm just wondering what a team looks like when something happens. Like, does a group all go together to a certain place? I'm sure in the Dakotas it's different than if you live in a large city like San Antonio with more people around here. Like, how do you get there? Who stays there? I'm interested in those.
In my experience, that's very situational. I served in cities within the Dakotas, which cities in Dakotas is relative.
Yeah.
Very relative. But, 20 to 100,000 is a city in the Dakotas. But it was very situational. There is, and I can tell you this situation, it never came out in the papers, and the guy probably should be in prison, but he didn't end up there. But I got called at midnight one night, and there was a young woman who had just dissolved in the sanctuary of one of the churches. She went in the sanctuary. I don't know how she got in there at midnight. She must have had a key or something. But I got called from my district superintendent, says, I know you're asleep, but we're kind of in trouble. The police have been called. There's a young woman. She had been abused sexually in that sanctuary as a teenager, and she was in her 30s. She was in really bad trouble. So I went over with the district superintendent, and we sat with her and listened to her story. Again, that was just 2 of us. And then we went back to the bishop, and the bishop ended up, I don't know what all happened, because that was only my role. The bishop took it from there.
Right.
And I do know the man wasn't in ministry anymore after that. He was serving another church, and he got released. But it's very situational. But that, like a group situation, like a congregation, I only did 3 of those, and in congregation situations, there was 4 or 5 of us that would go in, with a lot of supervision of us as well. The district superintendent and the bishop would be very specific with us. We do not want the conference administration there. We want you guys there. This is what we want you to do. It was very specific. So, Jen, go ahead. What are you going to say?
One thing to be aware of in any situation is the immediate instance you're dealing with may not be the only instance of abuse that's taken place in that congregation.
Right.
It's just the most recent, and it's the
Right.
reported one.
Right.
So you need to be sensitive to the fact that there's other dynamics that are going on that might come out in that process.
Absolutely. Yes.
If we're going to talk about recruitment, I'm in the Great Plains, which is all Nebraska and Kansas. And so geographic recruitment is very important for, most of our population is in the eastern part of the states. But you get out to the western parts, you're talking 500 miles.
To get to someplace.
To get someplace one way.
Right.
And so the idea of recruiting people from those areas. The second thing is recruiting people who are willing to work in a team rather than in an individual,
Right.
Which can help with the self-differentiation, can help with not going off the rails, or being a lone ranger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
When the person was asking about how you send out a team, in our team, we probably have 15 or 20 people, and we get an email about that we are needed, the location of the church, so, because our conference is, like most of them, is fairly large. So then we just respond if we might, if we're close, if we might be available. Some dates are thrown out. This isn't the first, but, even when the superintendent goes and reads the letter, we try to have a few people. I mean, we've even had a situation where we've had almost more team members than congregational members, but it didn't matter. I mean, so that's how we specifically do it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I'm curious if you can speak to one of my concerns when we send out response teams, especially in these vulnerable situations. One, we're not necessarily sending licensed counselors, and so it seems to me, I'd love to hear the role licensed counselors can play on these teams. And then the other question I have is, at what point do we call the authorities? I mean, when we're dealing with crime and abuse, right? And abuse. And those are just my 2 questions when we talk about building these teams.
Right. There's people in the room that have as much, if not more, experience than me, I'm realizing, in this work. So I really want you guys to speak up if you know of things. I can only say from my perspective, when crime was involved, it was pretty old. And we didn't have anything that was happening right that moment. It had been 10, 15, 20 years ago. But it was rape. It was awful. It was awful stuff. So anyway, and the legal authorities were involved eventually, but it wasn't me who did that. I walked with the victim, and the bishop and the DS did that part. So anyway, yes.
The use of a trained counselor therapist is for a couple of reasons. One is to help the team to be able to be at their best, to be a part of the training, to help. And the other thing that was a part of our training, the other use for a person like that is a debrief at the end of when the team is all finished, at the end of the day, whether it's been a congregational, sometimes especially if it's been a whole congregation, the team has taken a lot of hits, and they really need a lot of care. And I say taken a lot of hits, it's a barrage of anger and rage and pain and denial and we're the enemy. And so it's nice to have someone whose role, and this, they don't have to be that, certified or anything, but somebody who can facilitate some care for the team before everybody goes their different ways. And we sometimes deploy 15 people at a time. Sometimes there are places where we are the same number of people as there are from the church. Sometimes, because of our conference's size, sometimes we can only send 5, and everybody goes mostly on their own because we come from so many different directions.
I've not had personally the experience of having 15 people go. 5 has been the most. That's a lot. That is a lot to manage. That is a lot of emotion to manage. That is a lot of triggers to manage.
The time that we had the most
but it'd have to be a pretty special situation, I think.
Well, the time that we had the most people, it was a relatively small church. The lay leader had been arrested for molesting a 16-year-old, and one of the things that was demonstrated in that, because we were a quiet team that night, it was the whole congregation and us, and mostly we sat around the circle and just listened. And I think there was some healing and restoration just in this small church, seeing how much the conference cared about it. Because it wasn't just 1 or 2 people.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes.
In regard to mandated reporting, you need to know your state laws, and also if it's a child, you are mandated. Also, if you're a second career like I am, I'm mandated in 2 ways.
Yeah,
Right.
me too.
Right.
But that would already be taken care of.
Sufficient.
Yeah.
And again, this is my understanding of the information I was asked to share with you is that isn't our job. Our job, the judicatory, you saw all the other trainings that are happening here. The administrative judicial response is where that would happen. So it's not really our job. We're very clear what our job is to walk with them. We may not know everything, and we may never know the rest of the story, but our job is to walk with them.
I just wanted to ditto knowing your state, because in Texas, the person who suspects or hears it has to report it. And the bishop might choose to do that as well, but the person the first person to receive that information is mandated to report it.
Within 48 hours.
But that's not likely to be the crisis response team. That would be the DS or the.
No,
Or the pastor.
Thank you for that, though, by state is what you're saying.
Yeah,
That's
just
good.
knowing
That's
your
good.
state laws.
Absolutely, thank you.
And so
A
that's,
couple other people, go ahead.
that's what I was concerned about as well. For those persons who serve on the response team, sometimes we are in vulnerable positions, and persons learn our names, and they can become violent. And so how do we assure the safety even of those persons who go into these contexts and they are exposed and.
It would be my understanding, in a typical situation, the perpetrator would not know who the response team is. That's a confidential relationship. Is that what you're saying? That the response team member might be in danger? Is that what you're saying?
Right, and the congregation, they know who we are. They know who we are, they know our names, and
Right.
the person who says the perpetrator felt it was his right to know who
Okay.
came into the congregation and spoke with people. So that information became, he did know.
Right.
And it did become a situation. So.
I understand what you're saying. The only response I can intellectually give you is you're not alone in this. There is a system in place to support you. I realize I haven't seen that situation myself where I have felt, because I had a lot of support. I didn't feel I was in danger, even though some of it was really hard. But I understand what you're saying. Does anybody else have that experience of being in a situation where you felt like you were in danger? Yes.
Yeah, this happened pretty recently where I felt afraid and like I was in danger, and I found myself thinking like defending myself if I had to fight someone. And what I want to share in this group is it gave me an amazing insight into what the person I'm supporting must be experiencing. It's like, whoa, I'm thinking about myself, you know. So that was really helpful in that ongoing, in that relationship, walking with someone.
Right. That's good, Will. Thank you. Yes.
Question, so listening to these two, how important is it for the response team to be somewhat reflective of the group that they're going in to be with?
That's why, it's why one of the things is age, ethnicity, bilingual, there's all kinds of matching that would be happening there to make sure. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, because many of us who are ethnic, we serve in cross-racial appointments. And when things happen, I haven't served as a DS, when there's moral failure of a pastor, it's been my experience that people take in places they should never go because it's an ethnic person who is, that DS or whatever coming into that situation, or maybe part of the care team coming into that situation, which has nothing to do with what was already going on. But I wonder of the importance of the team being somewhat reflective of the people that they're going to serve, because you're going there to serve. And other layers may complicate the capacity of the team to serve.
Right. That is why we mentioned the ethnic and all of that. That is always a consideration. Anybody else? Yes.
I'll go back to the question about safety. I wasn't on the team at the time, but our team went to a situation when they were meeting with the congregation. I think it was when this district superintendent's letter was being read, and they had been threatened with violence. There were people in the congregation who said they were going to show up with guns. And so what the team did was, first of all, the police were notified, and only people from the congregation were allowed in. And I mean, they didn't get scanned. It was before that time.
So they kept it contained, is what you're
yes.
saying.
And so that's what and anyone on the team knew. They went in knowing that, yes, this is very volatile and this has been threatened. So they went in by choice.
Thank you. Yes.
We had one situation where we started the meeting with an active shooter training because there was an active threat with someone who was armed. But we have also used police asking them to be in the area in circumstances where violence was an actual reality. And I want to go back to the reporting issue.
Okay.
We're not there to investigate. But if we are informed, it depends on your state law, but if we are informed, everybody knows about a minor, but a vulnerable adult also is in many places mandatory reporting. And one of the issues is the kind of model we use in response team. So my home conference, our response team, when we do a congregational meeting, we break the congregation into small groups, no more than 6 people, so that there's different people listening in each group, and therefore you can come out of that small group and you can report something. Nobody knows who did the reporting, at that point, because what small group was it discussed in, kind of thing. So it depends on the model we use for the response and the situation we're responding to.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Anybody else in that respect?
We had a situation that just escalated. That we were there to read the letter. The congregation didn't want to accept it. They wanted the pastor to have a chance to apologize, et cetera, how could we know? And it was a full sanctuary of people, and people became very vocal in a way that we fortunately had 4 of us very calm team. stayed very calm. And then 3 of them got up and stomped out, and it just so happened that they were wearing NRA shirts, the right to bear arms, things like that. We did have a level of anxiety about where they were going and would they come back. It ended up being fine, but the energy in the room, there's the feelings, they can escalate very quickly, and we just stayed so calm, and it really, they ended up doing healing among themselves and talking each other down, which was just a Holy Spirit incredible thing to watch.
Somebody else had their hand up.
So just a point of clarification, what I was hearing is that we don't really have a job of, or do we have a job of information gathering or data collection?
No. What I did that role with the bishop in the Dakotas. I've served under 2 bishops. The first bishop was very dependent upon the care teams. Deployed them like crazy, trusted that we would gather what we needed and do what we needed to do and come back and bring the situation into some healing. The next bishop completely operated differently. Wanted just one of us to go alongside him and take notes, and I happened to be that person for him. And I took copious notes, sat with the victim if it was a female, and if he had a male too, that if it happened to be a male. And I was going to end that way, but all of this is all dependent upon the style of the bishop and how the bishop operates hers or his cabinet. Some bishops want to take care of it all by themselves, to be honest with you, with lots of documentation. Some bishops really want the care teams, that's why I think somebody said earlier today, you'll have care team, and some people will say, well, I never got deployed. Well, that's a possibility. It depends on, it depends on how things are functioning. Yes?
I just want to say, in the Baltimore Washington Conference, we have policies around the role and responsibilities of the response team, sexual misconduct response team. Is that common across other conferences, that other conferences have policies as related to the role of this team?
Yes. It is common, but you get a new bishop and it can be completely different. It's really bishop. So I'm sorry, it's the hierarchy again. Sorry, Will.
Don't tell people, hey, we're all partners.
Well, partnership is how the bishops have asked us to explain this, but each bishop's going to do it the way their comfort level is. And when you think, okay, so let's go back to the situation I just said. So the first bishop was completely comfortable. That bishop recruited us. That bishop was personally invested. There was 15 of us on the response team. Personally invested in what we were doing. The second bishop inherited us and had to figure out who were the people that I know is not going to go off and go into crazy land. Who are the people I'm going, so he happened to just have 3 or 4 of us he held close to do that. Does that make sense? So it's just a different kind of style. It's not right or wrong, it's a different style. So it's just kind of, anyway. Yes?
So you kind of addressed this a little bit by saying different bishops will do it different ways, but and I know in my conference, trying to get anything on the floor at AC would die on the floor if we were going to try and legislate. But is there some best practices for, like, should these people be serving in 3-year terms, 5-year terms? Like, when do they need to rotate off? Is there some evaluation? Is there annual training? Like, are there some best practices for establishing kind of a normative level that maybe a bishop might flex one way or another as to the use, but that the conference can have some kind of practices in place to establish, the health of these people? We don't want to burn down some volunteers, and throwing them in over and over and over again.
So
or relying on them for 15 straight years, and then they retire and you have no one to fill the gap.
So the conference I'm in right now, I'm a full member of the Pacific Northwest again. I was ordained there, then I transferred my membership to Dakotas, and I'm a little weird. Then came back to it, now I'm a full member again, back in the conference that ordained me. So when the Bishop Elaine is the one who asked me to be on this, okay, what is it called, Interagency Sexual Ethics Task Force, because she knows the Bishop in the Dakotas and she knows the work I did. And that's why she invited me to do this work. When I asked the questions, the same questions you were asking, what I was told was, there hasn't been a renewal or a refreshment in quite some time, and many of the people are retired and gone, or not even around at all. So there may be a care team, but it may be very small, and they haven't been refreshed, I guess would be the word that I would use. And so I think it's going to be very situational again, depending on how bishops operate and how they do that.
So how does this, work with legality? So if there is a complaint brought and, insurance purposes, as we heard, earlier, and, how does this response team, not get the conference in trouble if they're not being utilized effectively? If they're not following the policy.
Right. Again, that's not going to be our area. To be honest with you, that's going to be administrative judicial. I don't have an answer to that because I don't do that section. So I know how to walk with the people. I know how to train response teams, but I don't know how the judicial administrative part. I haven't been involved in that. So that gets handed off to the bishops and the DSs.
Going back to invitation, in looking at who may be appropriate for inviting to be a member of the response team, one question that might come up would be, in what situation or when would I recuse myself from being deployed to a certain area?
Because you're not able to at that time? Is that what you mean? Or?
Well, that actually is the question that I'm asking, and maybe there are some, apparently.
You can say no. Yes.
Yeah.
You
Well,
can say no.
the former church you served might not be the best person.
Yeah, or you just think it'd be available.
If you're uncomfortable, you say no. I mean, that no is an answer. Is that?
That's the
go
benefit
ahead.
of having a larger group, that when you're only sending 5, as the chair, I pick the skills and talents, and then the diversity, you look at all of that, you carve out the team, and then you ask. And every once in a while, I'll have folks say, my spirit is not in the right place right now. And I think, thank you for your honesty. Amen.
That's right, that's right, that's
And
right.
as a follow-up, might you give a small scenario in which a situation has happened and the response team would then be deployed and maybe go through 2 or 3 activities in which they would use in their responsibilities on a local site? Say you are actually training someone to be a member, to do what is necessary to be done in a response situation.
I'm not clear on the question.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
This is a trainer of trainers for a response team.
Right.
Is that correct? So, what is it that we need to be trained in? Are there scenarios in which you might use as an example? May I just give one?
Right.
Suppose there's been the death of a church member.
Okay.
The person died during the church service.
Right.
So that may be a situation. These are all kind of rhetorical, not really rhetorical.
Absolutely.
because
I get
they're
what you're
probably
saying.
examples of you. So maybe that's a situation in which a response team may be deployed if that particular church member especially was well known
Right.
throughout the expanse of congregation. So then the response team is deployed. So now what do they do?
What I'm going to say is going to seem like completely I'm scapegoating, but the second session is taught by Becky Williams. She's going to go deeper. I'm here to set the stage. I'm not nearly as expertise. In fact, there's a lot of people in this room who have a lot more expertise than I do. Just listening to you and your explanation was really powerful. So that is a good question for Becky Williams in the next session. It is, and she's going to talk more about how you train the response team, what that involves, what that looks like, and more detail and go deeper into that. So That's not a good answer, I realize, but that's the answer.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
You use the word care team and response team, are those the same thing?
They are. Yeah, it depends on whoever.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then also, you said there's other conferences that have policies and how they define the roles of these teams. So, are we gonna have copies or samples of something like that, is that accessible?
Yes, I believe that Becky may have those all
Okay.
collected.
Perfect.
Whether she's going to give those out to you, I have no idea, but I can find out. I can talk to her.
If additional allegations of misconduct come up while the response team is on site, apart from the mandatory reporting required by the state, does the response team have a responsibility to coach the person making those allegations in how to proceed with the church's process? Like telling them you should call the DS? Or is it solely to listen?
It is my experience with response team training and being on response teams, that is definitely not our role. Definitely not our role. We need to report it to our, probably the district superintendent or whoever has deployed you needs to know, because some more work needs to be done there, but it's not our job to explain the judiciary part. Not only that, we don't know it. That's not you're not going to be trained about that. You're going to be trained about how to walk with them. You're not going to be trained about the whole process. This is what our conference does.
I'm not talking about the whole process, I'm talking about the first step.
The first step, I still believe, coaching them on how to make the complaint. I'm not comfortable with that, I guess, where to walk with them. You can encourage them to call the DS, and then I would definitely, if I were you, I would call my DS or whoever deployed me, if it was the bishop, talk to the bishop.
That's what I was asking. Should we encourage them to call the DS? That's all I was asking.
Yes, the answer is then
I
yes.
always have my
Yes.
DS with me, because to me, they need to see that person is conscious, that might help, that situation.
Right, I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. I heard you say coach through, and I think I misunderstood, so the answer is yes, yes.
I think, but there has to be some caution with that, encourage, but not, I don't know that we should follow through by informing the DS, or we may re-victimize someone.
Right.
Because we broke a confidence. What they may have intended in confidence and received on a suggestion, for us to then pass that information on.
Yeah, I still,
That's on the direction of the bishop.
right, I
The
still,
bishop says, I want to know what happened.
I personally would tell the bishop or the DS. I would. I know it's a little tricky, but.
The response team isn't the response team the second response. I mean, someone who's already been informed about the crisis. So we were.
Right, you were deployed by the DS or the bishop who's already received the information. Right. Yes.
But if something else comes up, you encourage the DS to know. I think what I heard you say was perhaps re-victimize the situation in the church. I think, again, that belongs to the discretion of the bishop. The bishop would have laid out the ground rules, presumably, for the team.
Depending on the bishop and how they operate, yeah. Some of them are more explicit than others. So, yes.
I just wanted to say, on our response teams, when we are meeting with members of the congregation, usually in small groups, with a couple of us in the room, we let them know that, that this is their time to share and let out their feelings and ask questions. But we inform them, and if we find out, if we hear things that suggest there's been additional indiscretions or problems, that we will be reporting that, so they can then make the choice whether they want to bring it up.
Okay. So that's how your response team handles that. Okay, thank you for that input. That's good. Yes.
First of all, it's new for me to hear the term response team, because in the Philippines we don't have like a response team. So my question is, what actually the task of a response team from the Methodist perspective? Is this those people who are working with we do not use the victim but the survivors, working with the survivors and their families? Is this the one who do the investigation of what really happened? Is this response team is just only working upon the directive of the bishop? That's how we understand response team. Because in our community, in our country, we are also doing this, but with based on our convictions to respond of what is happening. Sometimes the bishop did not instruct us, but the conditions, the situations, is the one who called us to do something. That's what I want to clarify. Actually, recently, we just attended and organized a rally, a prayer rally for those a victim of a survivor of a rape and a gender-based violence, and with their family. But upon listening to these discussions, I think it's not what we did is not a response team from the perspective of our church.
Right. And are you currently serving in the Philippines?
Yeah, I'm currently
Okay.
serving the Philippines. I'm the
Wonderful.
chairperson of the Board of Ordained Ministry
Wonderful.
and the teaching in the College of Theology of SPMCI, one of the colleges of
Wonderful.
SPMCI.
First of all, I welcome you. I'm really glad you're here. I'm really glad you're here. I am only speaking from the perspective of what I know from the United States and how I have been trained and the bishops that have worked with me. And so I don't know how the Philippines is, even though we all have the same book of discipline, it's a little funky. So I don't have clear answers. I can only tell you what I know from my perspective here in America, and which would be, we are not the ones doing the investigation. We are deployed by the bishop and the district superintendent to walk alongside the victim or the alleged, whatever, the alleged accused as well. That has happened with the response team member as well. Walked alongside them, but not investigated or done anything legalistic with that.
So
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but what part, if you are walking along with the survivors,
Yes.
then what's the actual doings, or what actually you are doing in walking with those survivors?
What does that look like? You need to come to the next session, okay? Because she's going to go deep in that. That's all she's going to talk about. Although you've got some really good questions I can't answer, ask her. I'm serious, because she's the expert. She knows this stuff inside out. So you'll get the content then. I will say it's very similar to Stephen ministry training. I did that for 25 years, loved it. So it's very similar to that, but how we walk alongside. Yes, anybody else?
Yes, you raised the thought just a moment ago. So the response team can also be deployed to walk alongside the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator.
I'm not sure all conferences would operate that way, but it happened when I was in the Dakotas twice.
Okay. But primarily, we walk alongside the congregations.
Yes.
And
Very much
if
so.
needed, the parishioners are our main focus.
Yes. And I think this was alluded to earlier today. Sometimes the perpetrator, or I don't know, or the accused, those are such strong words. It's all language, but it's strong. Again, it's the difference between invite and recruit. I mean, language is so important. Oftentimes, whoever is being accused is given the opportunity to choose an advocate. I've seen that happen too, and that's very powerful for someone to walk with them. And somebody said that, I can't remember if it was your panel or not, but where they went through all these people and couldn't find somebody to do it.
So then they may turn to the response team to say.
Right, and it's your job to be really professional and walk with them, even if you believe there's wrong has happened, that you're representing the church at that point. So, anyway. Yes?
Two things in terms of language. The first is to piggyback on what was said earlier about recruiting.
Yeah.
The military gets deployed as well. And I'm realizing.
I didn't write these words, but this is interesting.
I understand, but for those of us who are clergy and others, we get sent.
Yep.
We simply get sent.
Yeah.
And the other is, I wanted to ask you regarding walking along with the accused. are we to walk with that person and provide support and listen ear to them? Or are we to advocate for them, which is what I think in some kind of proceeding? I think, to me, those seem to be two very different things.
It's not advocate, I think there's gonna be some inherent advocating going on, but it's not the first thing that we're asking you to do.
That word is what's used, but that's not what it is.
Yeah, advocate.
Again, we're getting into a subject area that isn't my expertise. This is Becky, so she'll be here at the next session, so I can't answer some of this. I really can't.
In our conference, if we had, and I'm going to go primarily with a misconduct case at this point, we might have somebody from the team that is going to walk with the complainant. We might have somebody else from the team who will walk with the respondent. And we may have other people from the team who will walk with the congregation. And then any particular, if there are particular staff or so forth that they need to walk with. So the response team might respond in a variety of different ways. And depending upon our particular skills or where we might be able to be called. But we try to make sure that the respondent, complainant, and the congregation all have people that we walk with.
Okay, great. That's a good example. Thank you. Yes.
In our conference, one of the issues of recruiting, or excuse me, inviting, because I like that, the best people are that the team cannot, members of the team cannot serve on the board of ministry because it's a conflict of interest. And the committee on investigations is a conflict of interest. So I don't know if that's something we need to say or talk about out loud, but and then people rotate on and off those boards and committees. So it has become an issue of trying to choose people that are our strongest, but that we are certainly not borrowing from the areas that would create a conflict.
It sounds like you have an intentional process in place, which is fantastic. That is really great. It's really great. So I know I have not answered all your questions. I'm hoping that in fact, I think that's probably a good thing. I want you to have more questions. That means you're going to keep searching this out and figuring it out. I don't know about you, but I find this work very heavy. It's not easy. As I'm standing here today, I just realize I'm revisiting all kinds of things I worked on, and it's all coming back to me, and it's pretty heavy stuff. And this is such holy, sacred, incredible work, and very difficult, and it's not just for anyone. I'm just going to be really honest. Yes?
Yes, I just have a quick comment.
Sure.
One of the things that I started with the response team was prayer. Because, it's not about me, it's about the group or the people that I'm going to serve. So that's where I get my understanding or my clarity. And then, of course, I understand that once I've prayed, I'm able to walk into that setting and just ask the Holy Spirit, to come and take me so I can truly understand and to see what is going on. Because although I've been briefed before going into, I still need that clarity and that sensibility, because I understand that people are hurting, and I've gotten into some situations. I'm from the North Texas Conference, by the way. I've gone into 4 different types of situations, and I can tell you once I left, I'm just alone because I have to be alone. And it's just a way to digress so that next time it comes up again, because I know it's going to come up again, I'm ready to move forward. But the first thing that I do want to say is when I was asked to join the response team, it was due to a situation that happened at my church. And so as I'm sitting in the congregation, just observing, being a part, I received a phone call from someone that said, someone is looking for you. And I'm going, who could possibly be looking for me with the part team? As it turned out, it was the recruiter, or I would just use the word the coordinator, that asked me to join. And so I asked her, what are you looking for? And she said, you're a good listener. I watched you.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And I said, okay. So I took it as my divine intervention to get involved. And that's why I always say, I pray before I enter, because I can't do it alone. And it's not about me, it's about us. So that's the only way I can make it through. But it's been an experience. I've heard some of the things that do happen. We go in with a briefing and we listen, we ask questions, but we have to be very mindful of the questions that we're asking, because we cannot cross that line. And that's when last year we received some training on the legality of it, and we're all going, oh, hey, you know, but that was good to know, because each of us have roles and responsibilities, and we really need to stay within them. And one of the things that I've learned, not just within the church, but with anything, if you have difficulty in it, it's time to pray about it. And if you feel that you can't get the answer, it may not be for you.
Right, right. What I really like what you said is about you were getting your spirit in alignment before you even walked into the situation. So you could be in your very best space, because they deserve that. That's beautiful. That's very nice. So thank you about that. Okay, so we went down all kinds of rabbit holes I didn't expect. So our final section is invitation to serve. Oh my goodness, we should be done. After everything we have discussed, I'm going to remind you once again who's the, okay, I hate this is all language, but the deploy again. Isn't this interesting that I didn't even pick up on that? I don't have much military family experience at all, so I didn't pick up on the language that deploy and recruitment.
We're going into battle. Deploy's not a bad word.
Right. So it's an interesting thing, but anyway, but that's something. This is language that's been handed down for quite a while. So it's an interesting. I really appreciate it. It's going to make me have to unpack that for a while, what that all means. So. One of the things, as you do an invitation to response teams, is you're going to have to figure out, I call it an elevator speech. What's your elevator speech going to be? Because when you talk with people one-on-one to say, we believe in consultation with the DS and Bishop, you are somebody that would be super effective to serve on a response team, and they're going to look at you like, what? So you got to come up with an elevator speech, with probably a pretty brief one so you don't lose their attention. So I want you to think about, can you, for just a moment, think about what that might be. Can you think what your 2 or 3 sentences might be as an invitation to someone to serve? As a care team, response team, whatever the name might be for your different setting. Yes?
You just said it. In consultation with the bishop and the DS, I think that because we are in a hierarchical system, that
we don't want to say that. The DSs don't, and they don't like that. Neither does the bishops. In partnership.
In a partnership, but if people, if you're Joe Schmo calling, it's one thing. If people hear, oh, the bishop and the DS, and I think that
has some
in our system. I think that you'll get their attention.
Okay, I think that's great. That's great. Anybody else have an idea?
The times I've gone in, I've said something to the effect that we are not alone in the United Methodist Church. We have a singular congregation in a small community.
Yeah.
The larger church wants to speak to you to say, we're with you. That's what I say.
Okay, beautiful. That's very nice. Yes?
I think also what the woman a few minutes ago said from the North Texas conference about somebody recognizing a gift in somebody else and affirming that and saying this is, like that list that we talked about characteristics. If it's something that's really powerful and maybe lacking on that response team, it's like you have this gift, like listening, or just a gift of being able to be present, or a prayerful presence in the midst of that. I think that's a really powerful way to affirm somebody and say we would like for you to join us in this sacred work.
That's great. That's great. In this sacred work. In this sacred work. How many of you are familiar with Marie Fortune's work? She uses the word and her work is really good, but she uses the word sacred a lot, that this is sacred and holy. So, What we have a couple things for you if you wanted. This is an example of an invitation letter from the Cal Nevada conference that on one side, and on the other side is just a little thing about, I have mixed feelings about it, but it's recruitment for a response team, and it's out of Alabama, West Florida. And it was something that they sent out to their congregations asking for people to be recommended, and so, which is great. As long as the people don't know about it and feel rejected if they don't get chosen. But this is here, so I got that. And also, there was another resource that Becky introduced to me, Becky Williams, and it's from the Mennonite Church. The Mennonite denomination has really got their act together about this. It's incredible. And it's a little book. It's a book that you can buy, but you can go online, and it's going to be in this letter. The website is there. You can click into their website, and I actually printed this out. It's 40 pages, so it's 20 pages back and front.
What's it called?
It is called Understanding Sexual Abuse by a Church Leader or Caregiver, 2nd edition. And again, if you pick up this letter, the reason it's going to be in here. But it is an outstanding resource. I know it's one that Becky feels really strongly about and has used it in many, many ways. And so just wanted you to be aware of those resources. So, and if you want one of these, I'll put it right here, I guess. I have a lot of space, but any other final thoughts? And I think we need to, since we're good old Methodists, we need to end with a short hymn. Don't you think? Go ahead. What do you
I was just curious what the video is all about that we were not able to see.
I don't know. I haven't seen it, didn't know about it. So if you want to start passing these around, that'd be great. So everybody knows that song, Sanctuary. It's such a simple song. But again, it's our preparation to be the sanctuary for this work. And so I want us to just end our time by singing that together. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary as we depart. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Thank you for being here.